All right, let's jump to it. It's good to be with you guys. I'm glad I get to spend the week with you. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Excited to open up these stories together, so we'll get into it. It is amazing what can happen when you place your trust in someone. It's a hot June day at Green Country Christian Camp in northeastern Oklahoma. My old youth minister, Art, is putting on this leadership retreat for some of the students in our youth ministry back home. He's got about 8 or 9 students with him at this retreat there at the camp. And they're doing on this one particular day, they're doing all these team building exercises to build unity and camaraderie amongst the group. And of course, anytime you're going to do team building exercises, it's only a matter of time before you get to the most famous of all team building exercises, which is the trust fall. And you guys know how the trust fall works, right? One person from the group turns their back to the rest of the team. They might be on the ground or they might be on some picnic table or something like that, and then they just fall back trusting that the rest of their team will catch them. That's the trust fall. And so on this particular day, they're doing that exercise. Everyone's taking turns falling back. I think it was just kind of some like 3-foot high retaining wall, not a huge deal that everyone's falling back and taking their turn. And then it comes to be Art's turn. And Art, you got to know, is the kind of guy that if he's going to do something, he wants to do it big. And so he sees in this moment an opportunity to really teach these students about trust, what trust is, not only that they can trust him, but that he truly trusts in them. And so he walks the group over to the camp canteen, which is essentially just this shack that sits up on top of a deck about 5 feet high off of the ground. And he gets in there underneath that deck and he begins to climb up the stairs. Now, Art is not a big guy by any means, but he is like a full-grown man. And he's fairly stocky, he's fairly solid, and so he easily outweighs any of the students that are there behind him. And so some of them are getting a little bit hesitant as they see him make his way up on the stairs, but Art's not finished yet. Once Art gets up on the deck, he proceeds then to pull himself up on top of the safety rail, which is an ironic name given what Art is about to do. Pulls himself up on top of the safety rail, which is like another 4 feet up off the deck. So now Art is a good 8-9 feet up in the air. And students are starting to get nervous. Some of them are starting to protest. Art, no, don't do this. We can't catch you, man. Please don't do this. Well, Art calms everybody down. He knows they're getting nervous. He gets all their attention. He says, hey, it's okay. I trust you. I trust you. So he calls them all together and they put their arms out, and Art turns his back to the group and he crosses his arm and he gives the signal. He calls out, falling. And they all nervously respond back, fall on. And then Art goes back, straight as a board, 9 feet out of the air, falling down through, and as you probably guessed, falling straight down to the gravel parking lot below. He hits the ground like a sack of potatoes, and the next several seconds are just pandemonium. Like girls are screaming, kids are apologizing, they think they may have just killed their youth minister. And it wasn't close. They didn't catch, the only thing actually they caught were his feet, which if anything makes it worse, right? So he hits the ground hard, and it had to have hurt. I know it had to have hurt to go 9 feet out of the air down to the gravel, which makes this next part so incredible. After he hits the ground, after he catches his breath, everyone is sitting there freaking out, and Art stands up, and he dusts himself off, and he gets everybody's attention. He looks every one of them in the eye, and he says, it's okay. I still trust you. And then he begins to make his way back over to the steps of that canteen. And he walks up the deck as all these students look at him in bewilderment, and he pulls himself up on top of the safety rail, and he turns his back to them. And they all just kind of look at him, and then they look at each other, and they all just kind of come together underneath him there and put their arms out, and he calls back to them, falling. And they all in one yell out, "Fall on," and Art goes back straight as a board, and it was almost like it was in slow motion. He begins to drop back out of the sky, down through the air, and then down into their arms, and then straight through their arms and down to the gravel parking lot again. See, it is amazing what can happen when you place your trust in someone, but only if that someone is the right someone. We're in 1 Kings 17 today. If you've got your Bibles, you can go ahead and turn to that text. If you don't have it, that's okay. We should have it up on the screen for you to follow along with. 1 Kings 17, and we're going to be starting in verse 8. It says this: "Then the Lord said to Elijah, 'Go and live in the village of Zarephath, near the city of Sidon. I have instructed a widow there to feed you.'" So Elijah is there hiding out by this brook, and the ravens are feeding him, and then God says, "I want you now to go to Zarephath." Gives Elijah these very strange instructions. And they're strange because on the surface they make absolutely no sense at all, for a number of different reasons. First of all, you heard it in the video, Zarephath is right there next to Sidon. It's in the region of Phoenicia, which is where Baal worship is like the national religion. This is the home country of Jezebel. Her dad, a guy by the name of Ethbaal, is the king of this region, and he's not only the king, he's also the high priest of Baal worship. This is the last place you want to go if you've been speaking out against Baal worship for the last several years, but that's where Elijah is sent. Not only that, but this area, it just sits just northwest of the land of Israel. It's going through the exact same drought and the exact same famine that Israel's going through. There's no more food or water there than there is in Israel, than where Elijah is already. It would have made so much more sense for God to have sent Elijah down south to the kingdom of Judah, where there was a good and godly king reigning there. And that king could have been able to protect Elijah, and he would have been able to provide. He'd had enough food and drink and all those things for Elijah to survive. But no, he sends him to Zarephath. And not just that, he sends him to a widow. And back in this day, when women were dependent on their husbands or their fathers for any sort of income or provision, being a widow meant that you were destined for a life of poverty and destitution. You don't go to widows for help. They come to you for help. So this seems ridiculous, what God has called him to do. But Elijah chooses to go there. The question is why? Why does God call him here and to this woman of all places? I'll tell you this, it's not an accident. I believe God is making a statement in sending Elijah to this place, but we'll get to that in a little bit. For now, let me summarize the next few verses for you. Elijah makes the journey across Israel up into the northwest to the region of Zarephath, and he comes to the city gates there, and when he comes there, he sees this widow there gathering sticks outside the city gates. Now, he would have known that she was a widow because she would have been wearing the traditional black garb of a woman in mourning. And so he goes up to this widow and he says to her, "Hey, would you mind getting me a drink of water?" Now, hospitality is a really big deal in this part of the world. And so even though she doesn't know him, she still feels kind of this obligation to go help him out. So she says, of course, and she goes to get him a drink. But as she's walking away, Elijah hollers out to her with another request. He says, "And also, would you mind bringing me back a little bit of bread as well?" Now, the Bible doesn't tell us what's going on through her mind in this moment, but I can take a pretty good guess. She's probably thinking to herself in this moment, "Are you kidding me? Does this man not know about the drought? Does he not know about the famine? Nobody's got extra food to spare. Who does he think he is asking me for this?" It's not what she says, though. She's a little more polite. Instead, she says, "Listen, I'd help you out, but the truth is, all I've got left is this little handful of flour and this little bit of oil, and I'm gathering these sticks right now so I can build a fire and bake one last loaf of bread for my son and I. It's going to be our last meal before we both die of starvation." Now, here's the point where Elijah is supposed to say, "Oh, I'm so sorry, forgive me, I'll go ask somebody else." That's not what he does, though. Look at what he says in verse 13. "But Elijah said to her, 'Don't be afraid. Go ahead and do just what you said, but make a little bread for me first. Then use what's left to prepare a meal for yourself and your son. Now, this is a bold ask. Hey, I know this is going to be your son's last meal and yours, but before you give him that food, give it to me first, and then whatever's left you can make for him. That's bold. It comes with a bold promise, though, as well. Verse 14. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel says, there will always be flour and olive oil left in your containers until the time when the Lord sends rain and crops to grow again. Now, this is important. You need to know this. Some of you already do, but it's important to know this. Anytime you're reading in the Old Testament and you see that word Lord there in all caps, capital L-O-R-D, that's a sign that the word that's actually being translated from the Hebrew is the name of God. We pronounce it Yahweh. You heard this last night. That's Elijah's name, means my God is Yahweh. And Elijah uses that name over and over again to bring clarity. Because if he were to just say to this woman, God will provide enough flour and oil for you, then she goes, oh yeah, my God, Baal, will provide enough. And so he wants to be clear, no, not him, Yahweh. My God, the God of Israel, promises to take care of you and provide for you if you will give bread to me first. Now, pause for just a second. Because in this moment, this woman is being invited into the story of God. She's been invited into all that God is wanting to do through this man, Elijah. She's being asked to be a part of it. Before she can jump in on that story, she's got to be able to answer this question first. Can this God be trusted? It's the same question that Elijah has had to ask. Can I trust this God? And actually that question is being posed to you today. You see, you too, this week, are being invited into the story of God. The offer is extended to you this week. Do you want in on what he's doing in the world? Do you want in on his kingdom work? Do you want in on what he wants to do in your life? The offer is there, but before you can answer that first question, or that second question, you got to answer the first, which is, do I trust him? Do I believe that he's good? Do I believe that he's strong enough to take care of me? More on that in just a minute, but for now, back to the story. Verse 15. So she did as Elijah said, and she and Elijah and her family continued to eat for many days. And there was always enough flour and olive oil left in the containers, just as Yahweh had promised through Elijah. So the woman, she chooses to trust this man and to trust his God. And because she does that, she's able to see God come through on his promise to take care of her and to take care of Elijah. Now, this would be a beautiful story if it ended right there. That'd be a great ending. They lived happily ever after, but it doesn't end there. It actually goes on. Sometime later, the woman's son became sick. He grew worse, and finally, he died. Then she said to Elijah, "O man of God, what have you done to me? Have you come here to point out my sins and kill my son?" So sometime during this period, probably a couple years that Elijah is living there at this house, her son comes down with this mysterious illness, and he gets more and more sick, and they try to help him, but they just can't until eventually he dies. And this feels like the cruelest joke in the world to this woman, that somehow this God, this Yahweh, would come and miraculously provide for her son, bring him from the brink of starvation and keep him alive, only to let him die from some random disease a short time later. So she lashes out at Elijah. She thinks that it's his fault, that in his coming, he's brought the attention of his God onto her, and now this God sees her sins, and he's punishing him for all of her sins. The truth is, though, Elijah can't seem to believe it either. It says in verse 19, "But Elijah replied, 'Give me your son.' And he took the child's body from her arms, carried him up the stairs to the room where he was staying, and laid the body on his bed. And then Elijah cried out to Yahweh, 'O Yahweh, my God, why have you brought tragedy to this widow who has opened her home to me, causing her son to die?'" Here's what I love about Elijah in this story, is he's no superhero here. He doesn't go through this unfazed. He's wrestling with what has just happened. He's struggling with it as much as she has. See, here's the thing that's kind of going on with Elijah is he's realizing that question, do I trust God? That's not a question that he just answers one time and then goes about with his life. No, that is a question that Elijah will have to answer time and time again. Every time God calls him to do something difficult, do I trust him? Every time life is not making sense, like this boy is dying here, he's got to answer that question. Do I still trust him? Every time God says, I'm going to provide for you, he's got to answer that question. Do I trust him? He doesn't just answer it one time and move on, and that's actually true for you and I as well. Some of you know this already. Many of you in here have made the decision to place your trust in God, to give your life to Jesus and to follow him. You truly and honestly trusted him and said, I trust you, God, I want to follow you. But then life happens. Tragedy strikes. A loved one dies, or you watch someone close to you go through terrible suffering. Maybe you yourself go through terrible suffering. Or maybe life is working fine, but you feel this sense that God is calling you to do something difficult, something that's scary and hard. And you got to ask yourself all over again, am I still committed to this? Do I still trust this God even when things aren't turning out the way I expected? Do I trust him when being obedient to him is going to make my life harder? Do I trust him when he feels distant or when bad things are happening to me? Can I trust that he's still in control and that he loves me and that he's working things out for my good, even if it doesn't look like it in this moment? Elijah chooses to trust, and he makes another bold request. The first one was to the widow. The second one is to God. Verse 21, and he stretched himself out over the child 3 times and cried out to Yahweh, "O Yahweh, my God, please let this child's life return to him." Now, you need to know that this is a really big request because up until this point, this has never happened before. Nowhere else in the Bible, nowhere else in history before this do we see anybody coming back from the dead. So what Elijah is asking, he has no precedent for. It's never happened before, but he trusts God anyway. He makes the request in faith, and here's what we see. Yahweh heard Elijah's prayer, and the life of the child returned, and he revived. Then Elijah brought him down from the upper room and gave him to his mother. "Look," he said, "your son is alive." And then the woman told Elijah, "Now I know for sure that you are a man of God and that Yahweh truly speaks through you." So he chooses to trust. He pours out his prayer to God. And as we said, amazing things can happen when you place your trust in the right person. We still haven't answered that question though yet. The question we asked at the very beginning, why do the amazing things happen here? Why did God send Elijah to this place of all places? Why the widow? Why Zarephath? Well, I told you it was because God is making a statement about himself. And the statement is that he is a God that provides. He is a God that can be trusted. See, if God had sent Elijah to like some king or some rich guy, then it would have been really easy for Elijah to have been confused and to think that the reason that I'm still alive today is because this king has all this extra food for me to eat. But if he sends him to the widow, then there's no mistake. Every day when Elijah wakes up, he knows that the only reason there's enough food for him is because God is miraculously providing enough flour and oil for them to eat every day. That's why he sends him to the widow. But why Zarephath? Why in the middle of Baal's home territory? Actually, that's exactly why. Because it's Baal's home territory. See, if there's any place on earth where Baal ought to be able to take care of people, where he ought to be able to provide, where he ought to be able to come through for people, it's right here. It's in his home court. It's in his home region. That's where he ought to be able to take care of people, but he doesn't because he can't. But Yahweh can. And right here in the middle of Jezebel's home country, in the land of Baal, Yahweh is stepping in to do what Baal cannot do. Stepping in to do unprecedented miracles. And you gotta wonder how long Ahab and Jezebel continued at this before they started to wonder. Before they started to ask this question, why is it that the storm god, because that's what Baal was, he was the god of the storms and the rain, why is it that the storm god can't seem to provide any storms for us? Why is it that no matter how much we pray to him or how many sacrifices we offer, how many idols we build and bow down to, why is it that he isn't able to end this drought? How long are you going to keep playing that game? I told you the story about Art at the beginning. Here's kind of the crazy thing. That story didn't actually end there after he fell that second time. The story goes that after hitting the ground the second time, Art got up, dusted himself off, walked back up on the deck, up onto the railing, fell back, and landed on the gravel again. And then, I promise you, I'm not making this up, and then he got himself up, walked back up on the deck, pulled himself up on the rail, fell back, and you guessed it, hit the ground again. Dude, Art, I love you, man, but at some point you gotta wise up. At some point, you got to realize that these people you're trusting in cannot catch you. If I could go back in time and say anything to Ahab, that's what I would say. When are you going to realize that this God you keep falling back on has no ability to catch you? That's actually what I want to say to some of you this morning. See, I don't know where all of you are on this exactly. I know that there's some of you in here who totally trust in God. You've placed your faith in him. You trust him and your lives show it. You try to live in obedience to him in all you do. There are a lot of others of you in here, though, that say that you trust in God, that you've said that you place your hope and your faith in him. But if you're honest, the way you live your life doesn't show it. It doesn't look like you've got a lot of hope or trust in him. Because when things get hard, you don't follow in obedience. Then there's some of you in here who you would just be straight up, you would be honest and just say, I don't trust him. Maybe it's because you don't buy any of this. This stuff just sounds like a bunch of fairy tales to you, and you go, I don't buy it. I don't believe in that stuff. Maybe you don't trust him because somebody gave you a false promise one day about, if you'll just follow God and place your faith in Jesus, then he's going to bless you, and he's going to make your life work smooth, and he's going to keep all your loved ones safe, which is a lie. That's nowhere in the Bible, but someone told you that, and so you believed it, and you feel like God's let you down. Maybe you just don't trust him because you don't want to lose control of your life and you don't know what he might call you to. I don't know where exactly you are on this. I can't answer that question for you. Do I trust this God? I can't. What I can tell you is this, though. If it's not him, it's something else. Everybody trusts in something. Everybody looks to someone or something to give them what they think they most need. You may say, no, not me. I don't trust in anybody but myself, Drew. There you go. See, what you've placed all your hope and your trust in is your own abilities, your hard work to be able to accomplish what you need in life to keep yourself secure and make yourself successful and be okay and take care of people around you. Maybe for some of you, it's what you place your hope in is this ability, the perception of other people, your status in front of people, that you're well-liked, that you're popular, that you've got a lot of Instagram followers, or maybe it's that your parents are always happy and pleased with you. And that's what you place all your hope in. For some of you, it's just as simple as the boy or the girl sitting next to you right now. That as long as she'll keep loving me, as long as he won't leave me, then I know I'll be okay. Listen, I don't know what it is you're placing your trust in. You're going to talk more about that tonight, so I'll just leave you with this one idea. And that is that of all the things you could be placing your trust in, whether it's the God of the Bible or some other God, or your accomplishments or your status or your relationships, whatever it may be, of all the things you could be placing your trust in, only one of those things has ever brought anybody back from the dead. Only one of them has that kind of power to reach down into death and to bring life up out of it. It's the God of Elijah. It's the God of the Bible. And you probably know this, but I'll say it anyway. This isn't the last time he does it either. So when you make your choice as to who you're going to trust, be sure you choose wisely, because it is amazing what can happen when we place our trust in the right person.